Welcome to the program. I'm Heather Hewitt. Australia's commitment to free trade is being put to the test, with calls on several fronts to strengthen the country's so-called anti-dumping laws. A key Gillard government supporter today launched an anti-dumping campaign with the aim of overhauling Australia's system of policing unfairly cheap imports. General Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, Paul Howes, says China in particular is targeting the Australian economy and undermining otherwise viable industries. And the federal opposition is joining the chorus, with Tony Abbott describing Australia's anti-dumping system as expensive and often ineffective. Peter McCutcheon reports.
At a factory near Ipswich, west of Brisbane, these 400-kilogram tubes or billets of aluminium are turned into everyday building materials. This state-of-the-art processing plant had a rough start to the year, with the swollen Bremer River nearly reaching its boundary fence.
Peter, the floodwaters came up to just at that intersection just down there below us. There was several metres over the road, came up to within a couple of hundred metres.
So no access and no power?
No access, no power. The plant was down for 4 days.
But the managing director of Capral Aluminium, Phil Jobe, says his company faces another, and in his opinion, far more dangerous deluge. A flood of cheap imports dumped on the Australian market from China.
It has cost jobs. It's cost several hundred jobs. This is about Australian industry being able to compete on a level playing field.
The experience of companies like Capral has prompted the Australian Workers' Union to launch a new campaign to stop cheap imports, unfairly undermining local industry.
They're laughing at us. Beijing is laughing at us.
But what one person perceives as anti-dumping laws, another views as thinly disguised protectionism.
Basically, they're anti-competitive. As a government instrument and from a standpoint of good governance, this doesn't pass the test, I don't think.
So this is not protectionism through the back door?
Of course it's not protectionism, and this is something that the World Trade Organization actively promotes.
Arguments about the dangers Australian industry faces from cheap imports, particularly from Asia, are as old as Federation itself. Most of Australia's tariff barrier was dismantled in the late 1980s and early 1990s, opening the Australian economy to international competition. But under the rules of the World Trade Organization, countries are allowed to impose duties on goods that are deemed to be priced below what's considered to be normal in their country of origin. These are the so-called anti-dumping laws.
We found the system to be quite bureaucratic, and we don't think that the final level of measures represents real world.
Phil Jobe has been involved in one of Australia's longest anti-dumping cases, and he wasn't happy with the outcome. Capral's aluminium extrusions have to compete with cheap Chinese imports that attract anti-dumping duties of about 6%. In the US and Canada, the duty is nearly 6 times higher.
Clearly, the customs regime and the anti-dumping regime in Australia is much tougher on Australian industry than like-minded Western nations around the world. And we think that's a very serious problem, and we think something needs to be done about that.
Now, Australia's anti-dumping system is currently under review, with the Productivity Commission recommending changes that could in fact make cases like Capral's even harder. The Commission has recommended the introduction of a public interest test that takes into account not only the companies which suffer from what they see as unfairly cheap products, but also those who stand to benefit.
The Productivity Commission's comments with regard to that were that anti-dumping generally protects a small number of applicants at the expense of the broader economy.
David Birrell is the incoming head of the Australian Steel Association, representing importers of steel. The association supports the introduction of a public interest test, pointing out that in any anti-dumping case there are winners and losers.
The launching of an anti-dumping action can have a chilling effect on overseas supply. The overseas steel mills, if an anti-dumping action is launched, can just look and supply product elsewhere.
That's why some economists, like Greg Cutbush, formerly with the Productivity Commission, want to do away with anti-dumping laws altogether.
That's just business. I mean, the world price for goods is the cheapest price you can get the stuff at, and if China happens to be producing them through its own silly policies a bit cheaper than otherwise, then lucky us, I would have thought.
The business that's being affected by anti-dumping.
Such economic theory doesn't go down well with the Australian Workers' Union. The AWU's General Secretary Paul Howes says dumping of cheap imports destroys local jobs.
In the long term, the consumer will be left worse off.
But there are some people that gain from this too, aren't there? There are people that can buy a very cheap product.
For a very short period of time. What will happen, if we lose the aluminium extrusion industry in this country, what will happen? Do you think China will continue to export goods into Australia that they are making a loss on? Of course not. They are trying to wipe out the domestic industry here.
Currently, Australia's anti-dumping cases are dealt with by an arm of the Australian Customs Service. The AWU wants the federal government to ditch the Productivity Commission review of dumping laws and set up a new body to deal with these cases.
I'm suspicious of a process which empowers a very small number of bureaucrats, disempowers our decision makers in the Parliament, and isn't open to public transparency.
The federal government says it will be responding to the Productivity Commission's report on anti-dumping measures in the upcoming budget, while opposition leader Tony Abbott is flagging more substantial changes if the coalition gets into office.
The existing anti-dumping rules are expensive, they're time-consuming, and they're often ineffective. We fully support free trade. We fully support our World Trade Organisation obligations. Nevertheless, we do need a more effective anti-dumping regime that we've got.
Capral says it's lost more than a third of its market to Chinese imports over the past decade. And it's proven that China has heavily subsidised raw aluminium in order to gain a strategic foothold in the Australian market.
We're not looking for tariffs. We're not looking for a reversion back to that sort of mindset. What we're asking is the countries that want to bring product into this country abide by the rules.
Peter McCutcheon with that report.